Welcome to the Geostrategic Podcast.
Today, we're trying to cut through some of that strategic fog surrounding Russia, figuring out their intentions, what Putin might do next. It's always tough.
It really is, often deliberately so. That whole concept of Maskirovka deception, keeping everyone off balance.
Yeah, exactly. Our mission is to unpack a really significant article that just came out in International Life that's a Международная жизнь. It's the top journal for the Russian Foreign Ministry.
And that's key. This isn't just some academic paper. It's a platform that often reflects, or at least signals, evolving thinking within the Kremlin itself, a sort of barometer.
Right. So here's the main point, the problem we're really digging into. This article strongly suggests an emerging view inside the Kremlin that sees the Baltic Sea area is basically an unavoidable military conflict zone.
Yeah, and that they feel they need to take, quote, serious steps to reassert Russian power there.
And crucially, it puts all the blame for the rising tension onto the Baltic states themselves. It's a worrying picture, and we want to get straight into what this could mean.
Definitely.
We're looking specifically at a piece by Nikolai Mesevich. He's a senior scholar at the Institute of Europe, part of the Russian Academy of Sciences. It's quite detailed, about 3,600 words.
And heavily footnoted, which adds to the sense of it being a serious statement.
So we're going to pull out the core arguments, because this feels like more than just one guy's opinion, right? It could be hinting at Moscow's actual playbook.
Well, first off, you have to understand the weight of the publication itself, International Life. Like you said, it's the Foreign Ministry's journal. So when something like this appears there, especially with this kind of argument, it's usually taken as reflecting, or perhaps testing, what you might call the evolving Kremlin worldview.
So it hints at what Moscow thinks is in its interest.
Exactly. It often gives clues about strategic directions they're considering, actions they might see as necessary. For anyone trying to read the tea leaves in Moscow, you pay attention to this journal. It's a significant signal.
Okay, so the journal itself carries weight. But what about the author, Mesevich? You mentioned he's not just some random academic.
No, not at all. And this is quite interesting. His background, it gives his words a particular kind of resonance in Moscow.
How so?
Well, back in the 90s in St. Petersburg, he held positions dealing with foreign students. And this was at the same time Vladimir Putin was in the city administration in similar kinds of roles involving international connections.
Oh, okay. So there's a potential historical link there.
Right. Whether they're still close today is almost beside the point. The perception within the Russian elite, certainly within the foreign ministry, is likely that he developed ties back then. So this history, this perception, it gives his views on Baltic policy special weight for Moscow. It makes his analysis seem particularly influential, lending credibility to the idea he's reflecting, or maybe even shaping high-level thinking.
Okay, so we've got an important journal, an author with perceived connections.
Yeah.
What's the core message? What is Mesevich actually arguing about the Baltic Sea? You said he doesn't pull punches?
No, he really doesn't. His main point is stark. He says the region around the Baltic Sea has might become, but has become a potential theater of military operations.
Wow, that's direct. Not a distant risk, but a current reality in his view.
That's exactly how he frames it. It basically recasts the entire geopolitical situation there as one of imminent military confrontation.
And whose fault is this, according to him? He must assign blame for this shift to a theater of military operations.
Oh, absolutely. He puts the blame squarely on the West. He argues the West is now using the Baltic countries to threaten Russia.
So Russia's just reacting in this narrative.
That's the logic, yes. It's presented as a response to being threatened, being encircled. And this framing is critical because it leads directly to his conclusion. Moscow, he says, has no choice but to take more serious steps, lest the situation in that region deteriorate further.
So any Russian action is preemptively framed as defensive.
Necessarily. It's a classic justification narrative.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting, especially for you listening. If you track geostrategic shifts, historically, the Russian Foreign Ministry, well, sometimes it seemed to play a slightly different role, maybe more moderating compared to the defense commentators.
That's often been the case, yes. Or at least offering a diplomatic perspective, sometimes acting as a bit of a constraint on the more hawkish elements.
So what does this article in this journal tell us about the Foreign Ministry's stance now? Why is this alignment, if that's what it is, so important?
It suggests a really significant shift, a convergence. The diplomatic arm seems to be adopting language and a posture that, previously you'd associate more directly with the military side.
So the foreign ministry is sounding more like the defense ministry.
In this context, yes. When their top journal publishes arguments that echo the more, shall we say, radical commentators linked to the defense ministry, it points towards a hardening of the official line.
Meaning fewer internal checks and balances on a confrontational approach.
It certainly suggests that. It implies a narrowing of the acceptable viewpoints within the Kremlin, with diplomacy potentially being reframed not just for de-escalation, but maybe to justify or prepare for confrontation. It feels like a practical policy alignment, not just talk.
Okay, so if the Baltic is now seen this way, as a military theater, how does Mezevich explain how we got here? What's his story about the Baltic countries' role in this deterioration?
A big part of his narrative focuses on Finland and Sweden, their decision to ditch neutrality and join NATO. He presents that as a key catalyst, a major provocation that fundamentally changed the security picture.
Right, the NATO expansion point.
Yes. But then he goes further and essentially lays all the onus on the Baltic countries themselves for making things worse as he sees it, deliberately so.
And he makes a really, really strong claim about their current attitude, doesn't he? Could you share that quote again? It was quite striking.
It is. He writes, and this is a direct quote, "In contrast to the political situation of 1939, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, and with certain qualifications, Finland as well, are openly and even demonstratively declaring that they are in a state of war with Russia."
Wow. Openly and demonstratively declaring they are in a state of war. That's incredibly inflammatory. He's essentially saying they've already declared war.
That's the implication. By framing it that way, from Moscow's perspective, it sort of strips away any possibility of seeing them as neutral or just defensive. It suggests they've already crossed a line.
So if they're already at war in this view, what path forward does Mezevich see for them? It sounds pretty bleak.
It's very bleak, almost a zero-sum game. He argues, and again this phrasing is telling, that the possibility of demilitarization of the consciousness and economic political practices for the Baltics is excluded.
Demilitarization of the consciousness. What does that even mean?
It implies, I think, that they can't go back, that their mindset, their policies, are now irreversibly anti-Russian, in his view. They're locked into this confrontational path.
Okay, so if they can't demilitarize their consciousness, then what?
Then, he concludes, they've basically chosen a path that leads to one of two outcomes. Either, quote, victory or capitulation.
Victory or capitulation. No middle ground, no negotiation.
Apparently not in this worldview. It's stark, win or lose. It really taps into a deep historical narrative of inevitable conflict, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And then there's that even more disturbing detail he includes about supposed discussions inside the Baltic states.
Yes. That's quite something. He writes that the variant that the Russians will conquer us, but then we will win, is being discussed not in the press, but in the organs of power as the best option.
That's chilling. Whether it's true or not, claiming that's being discussed to their governments paints a picture of extreme, almost irrational defiance from Moscow's perspective.
Exactly. It serves to portray them as utterly intractable, stubbornly resistant, which then, of course, helps justify why Moscow might feel it needs to take those serious steps he mentioned. It paints the opponent as unreasonable.
Okay, so given this picture escalating tensions, the Baltics supposedly at war and defiant, what does Mezevich say Russia's actual interests are here? What's the justification for these compelling changes he's hinting Russia might need to make?
He points to two main drivers. First, strategic access. He argues the Kremlin has to reassert its power to guarantee access through the Baltic Sea, calling it a key route for Russian trade.
Right, the economic and naval access angle. That's standard great power politics, I suppose.
It is. Maintaining those sea lanes is crucial for them. But the second point is more about internal politics.
Which connects to narratives we've seen elsewhere, like Ukraine.
Precisely. Mezevich claims the Baltic countries are increasingly following Ukraine in attempting to destabilize Moscow by supporting non-Russian groups within Russia.
Ah, the internal destabilization argument, portraying them as interfering inside Russia itself.
Yes. And that's a very sensitive point for the Kremlin. It frames the Baltic states not just as external adversaries, but as actively working to undermine Russia's own domestic stability and cohesion. That provides a powerful internal justification for taking a hard line.
So he's building a case, piece by piece, justifying potential future Russian actions.
He absolutely is. And maybe the most critical point for you, the listener, to grasp is how he links this to Ukraine. He explicitly draws a rhetorical parallel to Putin's own justification for the invasion, the special military operation.
I saw so.
He basically suggests the Baltic countries will only have themselves to blame if Moscow is compelled to use its advantages to compel them to change their ways.
So it's their fault if Russia acts.
That's the clear message. It's not just a warning. It's saying any future Russian serious steps will be presented as a direct, necessary, and justified consequence of the Baltic states' own alleged provocations and attempts to destabilize Russia.
Okay, let's try and bring this together then. What's the so what? Why is this specific article matter so much? It's not just one academic's view, is it?
No, definitely not. And that's the core takeaway. Mizovich's arguments, as we've discussed, they closely resemble those presented by many of the more radical commentators with links to the Russian Defense Ministry.
So the content isn't entirely new, maybe, but the venue is what's critical.
Exactly. It's appearing prominently in the Foreign Ministry's top journal. This isn't some fringe publication. It suggests these hawkish views are gaining mainstream acceptance within the official foreign policy establishment.
And that convergence, that alignment between the Foreign Ministry and the Defense Ministry views, that's the really alarming signal here.
It is profoundly alarming, yes. It strongly suggests the Foreign Ministry is becoming more closely aligned with the Defense Ministry on Baltic policy. This isn't just a subtle nuance. It points to a deeper, perhaps more entrenched, strategic consensus forming.
An emerging elite consensus, as the analysis puts it.
Precisely. A unified, increasingly hawkish stance seems to be gaining official traction within the Kremlin regarding the Baltics. And for you, listening, it means recognizing that the official rhetoric is hardening significantly. Those lines between diplomatic thinking and military thinking seem to be blurring at the very top.
So just to recap for everyone, this deep dive into Mizovich's article in International Life really highlights a potentially critical shift. We're seeing the Russian Foreign Ministry seemingly aligning with tougher, defense-oriented views, signaling what looks like an emerging Kremlin consensus that views the Baltic region as an unavoidable zone of military friction.
And importantly, placing the blame for this squarely on the Baltic states and the West.
Right. And this isn't just academic chatter. Yeah. Coming from this source, it feels like a clear authoritative signal about the confrontational mindset that seems to be solidifying in Moscow.
And understanding this internal Russian conversation, these narratives, is just vital if you're interested in geostrategic issues. It's a rare glimpse, even if it's a worrying one, into the thinking that could drive future actions.
It helps you understand the why behind Moscow's increasingly assertive posture, the context for it all.
Definitely.
So the final thought to leave you with, if this consensus is truly emerging, if these statements in an official journal reflect reality, what does that actually mean for NATO's eastern flank, for European security overall in the next few years?
Yeah, how might this thinking reshape diplomacy, reshape military postures in the Baltic region? Could we be entering a new phase of heightened tension, requiring a whole strategic rethink?
That's certainly something for all of us to think about long after this deep dive ends. A challenging question for a challenging world.
Thanks for tuning in. If you found this discussion valuable, please like, share, and subscribe to the Geostrategic Podcast for more in-depth analysis on topics that shape our world. Stay informed, stay ahead, and stay tuned for the next episode.